Hi guys, Jess here from the Scrappy Sisters. So in this video I am making a Coptic stitch junk journal. And I'm just showing you there what one of my signatures looks like. It is definitely not a perfect journal. It has deliberately got different size pages, it's got tears, it's got border punches, and it's got a few embellishments thrown in there for Katie. So she can use this however she so desires. I'm not 100% sure what she would choose to do with it just yet. I'm imagining sort of a bit of traveler's notebook style, put in photos, mess it up with inks and paints and just go to town on it. So I was just showing you there my mixture of signatures, and I will put sort of rough sizes and things down below. And I also have this old reject shop. It's supposed to be an album, but it's just plain white paper inside. And I've had it sitting on my shelf for a million billion years. And I thought it was the perfect thickness to be a front cover and a back cover for my Copic's journal here. So I'm actually just trashing this album, cutting the cover off. I'll use that white paper for something else. I'll probably actually leave it bound like that and just use it as like a notes journal for shopping lists and things like that. So I'm about to start writing down a few different sizes for you just to give you a basic idea. Now I only measure out the largest piece of paper that I have, and it is 11 3/4 inches by 6 3/4 inches approximately. It's not an exact measurement because it was a little bit in between. It wasn't quite 7/8 or anything like that. It was a little bit of an awkward size. So that's the size of the biggest piece of paper that I cut out, and the other ones are all just random sizes within that. None of them are wider than that one piece. That's the widest one when you fold it in half, but there are a lot smaller ones and there's a whole bunch of different ones. So I created 16 signatures, and that's what each little bundle of paper is called. It's called a signature, and within that signature there's 4 sheets of paper. Now to cut my cover. Now you could choose to cut this completely flush with the size of your book, but because my pages are all different sizes and are a bit rough and a bit all over the place, I decided I was going to make it just a little bit larger on the top, bottom and outer edges. I wasn't really sure if my Fiskars cutter would cut through that cardboard, but going back and forth a few times it did. Probably dreadful for its blade, but I don't really use this one very much because it doesn't cut straight for some reason. It cuts slightly off on an angle, which is really annoying. But I thought because I wanted to cut through such a thick amount, I would use the one I don't use often. So you can see there I've not actually measured what size this is. I'm just cutting it to fit, and then I'll show you the measurements at the end. And I can tell you it right now, but I will write them down on my piece of paper with my thick texter so you can clearly see my measurements there if you're following along at home. And I will also write these in the description down below. So it is... yeah, perfect. That's going to be perfect. So you can see there that there's a border around the top, the outside and the bottom edge. And I obviously will cut both of those cover pages the same size. So I'm just measuring that out now, and it is 7.5 inches. By 5 3/4 inches. Now, we don't work in inches in Australia, so I apologise to those of you that would rather have this in centimetres. I didn't do that. And then when it comes to the hole punching, I actually did do that one in centimetres, so I better get the inches. Oh, just getting my journal here. It is an inch and an inch basically, so measure an inch down. Sorry for all of the rattling in the background. So measure an inch from both edges, if that makes sense. So, and then they're each an inch apart from each other. Gosh, I hope that makes sense. So you want to do these holes an inch from the edge, starting an inch in and then an inch apart from each other. Hopefully you can sort of see there. I know it's black on black. There are pictures at the end as well that might be of more help to you. I will also link below the tutorial that I followed to learn how to do this. This is the first time I've ever made a Coptic binding journal. This is not a practice one. This is not the second time. This is literally the first time I'm doing it. So I'm learning it with you as we go along. To then make the holes in the front cover or the back cover, I'm just holding them together and sticking the pin all the way through both sets of holes. Now, I didn't use any special tools. I don't have any special bookbinding tools. I'm simply using a piece of foam that I push into with my pin and just a thick sewing needle, and that's it. To do the holes in the signatures, I've just put my piece of paper sort of in the middle there and drawn a little grey lead mark where those holes were instead of measuring again an inch and an inch, because obviously the outside cover was that slightly bit bigger than the paper. And then because the papers are all different sizes, I'm just getting them to be approximately in the center, and then I'm going to tap the folded edge of the signatures across the table so that they're all flush together. And then just using that cover as a bit of a ruler, I'm ruling a line from the first grey lead hole mark that I did. Now, I found that was tricky to do on camera because I ended up holding the signatures in a bunch together, actually between my legs to hold them upright, and I couldn't film that for you. I apologize. So basically, when you marked the signatures with your grey lead, I then just ruled all the way down along them to show where the marks were. Now, sometimes that grey lead line was a bit hard to see, so I just pulled that first signature back and just copied where those hole punched marks were. Now, this is a little bit repetitive. This is literally just me putting in the signature holes for the binding, but I left it in because I thought you might be interested to see what I have done for the different pages in my journal. So you can see I've used patterned paper. I only used patterned paper, so there's no white paper in this, but the backs of a lot of the patterned paper is white. In fact, I think the backs of all of this paper is white. I don't think there is a single piece of double-sided paper. I didn't alternate how I folded them. I folded them all pattern side out, but you can see that I included doilies, I added some embellishments, I added some gift tags, I added some frames, I added some envelopes. There are pages of a magazine, there is pages from a little kid's picture storybook. So there's a whole bunch. There's some ephemera pieces that I've glued in, I've torn the edges, I've border punched the edges. So there's a whole bunch of things that I did to each of the different pages just to jazz them up a little bit. So my thoughts here is that this is a junk journal. So the purpose of this journal, there isn't really one. I'd like to hope that Katie can use it like a traveler's notebook, stick pictures in, sort of embellish the page a little bit, but also to use it to practice her Miss Media or to put like the envelopes and stuff. I thought she could put any sentimental things that she might have in there that go with a photograph, or a menu or something like that she picks up along the way. So when you see me bring this first dark green and flower signature back, it's when I can't see the grey lead marks on the next signature that I'm trying to put the holes into. And so I just bring it back and use that as a guide for where the holes need to go. I also opened every single signature just to make sure that the pages were lined up in the center, because I still wanted those smallest ones to be in approximately the middle. So I am using white crochet thread. It is 20-gram net, crochet, 3 coats, chain, don't know. I'm just reading what the label says, but it's just white crocheting thread. And I pulled off quite a decent amount. I will need more. This amount of string is still a lot to try and pull through without getting knots in it, and it does quite often get knotted. So I tied one knot in the end, and I'm just going through the first hole in my signature, so pushing it all the way, the needle all the way through that first hole. So then I'm going to pull the thread all the way through there and have that knot form at the end. Then I'm going to the outside, the good side of the hard cover, and pulling the needle back through. And that will cause a little loop around the cover there. I will then thread the needle, like tying a knot, thread the needle back up and through that thread, that loop, and then back in the same hole of the signature. Now, know that this is hard to see, and it's probably a little bit challenging to follow along. This is not the very best tutorial for how to do Coptic binding, and I will link the video below that I use to help learn how to do this. I guess the purpose of this video is more about seeing an alternative way of making a junk journal and not having such a nice, beautiful looking journal. So you then go into the next hole. Now because of my pages not all being the same, sometimes I have to put the needle through one page at a time. And then you'll see a bit clearer here how you go in through the good side of the cover, and then pull your needle through. Mine got a little bit stuck there, but it gets easier as you get going. And then stick the needle underneath, pull it tight, and back in that same hole. So that was a lot clearer than the first one. So hopefully that was a bit of a help to you. Now, it's such a long piece of thread, it is very easy to get knotted, so take your time. It might even be worth waxing your needle by running it across a old candle. So going through the good side of your cover and out of the bad side, or out of the inside, and then underneath that thread and back in the same hole. And so you're going to keep on doing that all the way along until you get to your last hole in the signature. So I am now just coming through the good side of my last hole. And so then I loop underneath the thread, but instead of going back into the same hole of the signature, I'm going to get my next signature and go inside that hole. But if you're playing along at home, I've just realised my signature's upside down. Oh, disaster. So I just took all the ephemera off and turned it the correct way up. Checked that this one is the right way up. And then you can see here I'm going through, instead of back in the same hole, into the first hole of the new signature. And again, as I mentioned before, because my pages are all different sizes and all of that, I sometimes had to do each hole or each sheet their hole one at a time. I didn't have to do it the whole entire time or for every single signature, but some of them, especially the ones that had quite a few different sized papers inside them, it was a little bit tricky. So then once you go in the hole, you've got to pull that needle all the way through and then wrap it through the cord and then back in the same signature, the same hole of that signature. What am I doing? Oh, I'm putting on a sequin. I decided I wanted to jazz up the look here a little bit. So coming out and then going through the last signatures, like looping around that last signature's thread. And then I'm popping on a sequin. I did find it got a little bit tricky the tighter the binding got. So you want to pull it tight, but you don't want to pull it too tight, because you can see on the top right hand side that the binding is pulling away from the edge a little bit. I do fix that in the end. It just happens. I didn't do anything. I just didn't pull it so tightly. So then wrapping around that next string, then I'm going to pop on a sequin. Now some people did their embellishing on the Copic binding at the end separately, but I didn't have any what do you want to call them, like rings that I could connect to the spine. So I'm just jumping straight in while I'm going along now. Now there's pros and cons of that. Sometimes the sequin sticks out sideways, which is cool, and then other times it gets swallowed up a little bit inside the binding. It doesn't affect the way your book lays flat or anything like that, and I still think it has a cool effect because, let's be honest, the whole point of my particular Coptic journal is to be a bit crazy and a bit junky and a bit eclectic, so it suits what I'm going for. You could use buttons, you could use tassels, you could use charms. I only stuck with sequins because I wasn't 100% sure how it was going to work and what it would look like. So there you can see I've got another knot, which is a little bit annoying. But yeah, just keep going along and popping on your sequins in each one. And the way I did it is I did a signature with sequins. So I did 2 signatures with sequins. Let me start that again. I did 2 signatures without sequins. Then I did 1 signature with sequins, 1 signature without sequins, 1 signature with sequins. And that was 8 signatures, and that's halfway. So then I did the same thing in reverse to finish off the next half. So 1 signature without sequins, 1 signature with sequins, 1 signature without sequins, 1 signature with sequins, and then 2 without sequins. I know that was really confusing. I will write that down in the description box, and I'll also show you when we get a bit closer to what's happening. Obviously, I've only done 1 so far, so I will give you a close-up view of the halfway mark and then definitely the finished mark as well. So here's a close-up view of the halfway point with the sequins in there. So what there's 2 signatures with no sequins, 1 with sequins, 1 without sequins, 1 with sequins, 1 without sequins, 1 with sequins. Sorry, that makes 8. So I'm just writing this down. So again, if you're playing along at home, it might make a bit more sense to you. So that is the 8 that I have done so far in this book. So that is 8 signatures in my Coptic book binding there, and then I've still got 8 more to go. So I'm going to do the next 8 in reverse to finish it off. So keep alternating with, without, and then to finish up, there'll be 2 without sequins until you get to, and then the cover. So I also need a new thread, so I'm just tying off this one inside the signature here, just doing two little knots, and then I'm going to cut as closely as I can to the end of the thread, and you barely even notice that inside the signature. And so to start the next one, I'm just threading straight back through that same hole. So the 2 knots will be together. I could have started at the bottom actually so that the knots would be separate, but I wasn't too worried. You can see in that signature I had a picture from a recipe book, which is going to make me starving every time I look at it. How delicious does that chocolate mousse thing look? And then that prawn salad. Anyway, so again, I'm going through. So you might think, oh, you didn't go through that piece of paper. That's because it was too small. So the first hole wasn't pierced in that one. That paper was too thin. And that's okay. It's not going through every single hole is fine because it's got plenty to go through, if that makes sense. There's a lot of binding on this one. So I'm up to 1 without sequins. So I'm just going to go through that same process of looping around the previous thread. Again, I get a lot of knots in this string again because it's so long once again, but it's easier than tying off multiple lengths of string. One thing I did find is putting the sequins on actually made looping around the previous signature easier, because the string wasn't quite as tight, because it couldn't be, because the sequin was in the way, which was really quite handy. So I'm going to progress with this binding, going around each previous signature and back in the same hole. Again, hopefully you saw what I was doing earlier on in the video, and I've also linked in the description box down below the tutorial that I watched to learn how to do it. So I am practically finished. I've got one signature and my cover left, and you need to do those together as a team. So the first thing I'm doing is going through the good side of my cover and then through that last signature. So it's not attached to anything yet. That's what I mean by saying there need to be a team. So don't do all your signatures at once. Leave one that you haven't done yet, because you need to attach that at the same time as your cover. So I'm threading through that first hole. And so I then go out the next part of the signature, and I want to go all the way through the good side of my front cover, and then loop around that string and back through that hole again. Come on, where's the middle? Gosh, I make this look so difficult. It's really not that tricky. As I said, I'm learning this with you. This is not my practice run. This is the only time I've ever done this. And I didn't really make any mistakes as such. It's not that hard. I didn't use any specific tools. A needle and some string, and that's about it. And so then looping around that, pulling it tight. I must have looped that incorrectly. I know what I've done. I've been looping around the cover, not around the previous signature. So the cover and that last signature aren't holding on to anything. So when you loop around the string, make sure it's still around the last signature that was attached to the whole bunch, not just the cover's signature, because then the cover won't be attached to the whole book. It'll just be attached together with one signature. So I'm going back there and making sure I'm looping it through the last bunch of signatures, I hope that makes sense. And then back through the same hole. And then through the next hole, through the good side of the cover. And then not looping it through that first signature, because that signature is not connected to anything, but looping it through the whole bunch. Can you see? Yes, sort of. Sometimes I found it easier to push the needle back in between the signatures and then push it back out from the inside there, because it was an easier way to loop it around that thread. If that makes sense. Please have a look at the tutorial I followed. This is a dreadful explanation, I feel. I don't think I'm doing this any justice. So I'm going to keep going with putting on my cover, and then I'm going to jump to the end to show you some close-ups. So I am on to my last one. So I've just come through the good side of the cover, looping around the last thread in the bunch, back through the inside of that same signature, tying the knot off, and then cutting it as close to the book as I can. And it is done. So you can see there, standing up, how beautiful and thick it is. There's a lot of pages in this, and it looks pretty amazing. So I'm going to bring it up to you to show you some close-ups. So there's the beautiful cover, the nice gold foiling. There's the binding there with the sequins on it, and you can see all the rough edges there, and just how this is certainly not a perfect journal. It was not supposed to be a perfect journal. You can see how it opens beautifully and flat. That's the beauty of this Coptic binding, that you can lay it flat on your work surface. I'll also show you again another close-up in better lighting, because that lighting was a bit ordinary. But I had the camera in different angles, so I hope you can still sort of see what's happening here. Gives you a better view of the different pages inside the book as well. I was really happy with the way this turned out. I think it's really beautiful. So my plan is, that Katie practices her mixed media in it, adds photographs, does some journaling, does some storytelling. It's really just anything she wants it to be. It's big enough that you could almost use it as a diary, to just write about your day, put in a few photos about your day, put in a few thoughts about your day, things you're grateful for. I know people do those thankful for and grateful for in November for Thanksgiving. This would be amazing for that. Probably almost too big for that. But if you do, there are 16 signatures with 4 pages in each one. If you do a gratitude diary, you could write what you're grateful for. You can almost do 2 on a page and it'll get you through an entire year. So it's quite a decent size book here, which is pretty cool. So just showing you a few more of the bits and bobs that are inside this, the different pattern papers. And now I'm coming up to give you a better view of the spine, because that's obviously the really, really interesting part. There are also some photographs as well that will show you a bit of a better view as well. So here they come now. As I said, I was really happy with how this turned out. This was my first go of doing this, and I definitely want to try it again. It was not as hard as I thought it was going to be. I think it's not the neatest job I've ever done, but I think it was really successful. And definitely, if I can do it, you guys can give it a go too. Check out the description box if you'd like the link for the persons who I followed. But honestly, if you type it into YouTube, there are heaps of tutorials that actually really properly teach you how to make this. Hopefully my tutorial here has just inspired you to make a bit more of a junky version than the beautiful, nice, clean-cut versions that people often make. So thank you so much for watching, and catch us tomorrow for another video. Bye everyone.